Good evening, friends. Welcome to frigid Key Largo. You know, this is one of the few places that you can actually come to vacation to watch iguanas falling out of the trees. I really feel like saying, welcome to Buffalo, New York. Uh, this is about the warmest clothes I have, so we're all trying to figure out how to turn our heat on today for the first time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Weiss. I have the distinct privilege of serving as the president of Congregation Ocean Reef and vice chair of the Ocean Reef Chapel and Fellowship Center. And we're really delighted here to continue our series of unity and really the human story with an incredible pair of speakers tonight, which I intentionally am not going to introduce. I'm going to give that honor to someone else. But before we start, there are just a couple of ground rules I would like to go through. The first is please turn your phones off if you haven't already done so, if you could silence your phones. In the back of the pews, you're going to see cards and pencils with questions. Toward the end of the speaking program, we will be picking up the questions. We'll send our our wives, I don't want to get in trouble here, through the aisles to pick up the cards, and they'll bring them up to stage, and that way it can be an orderly process for responding. Tonight is going to be a very sensitive and personal statement being made, very moving. With that, we also have some ground rules on the type of questions to ask. We're going to be avoiding anything personal about the health of their son, what he goes through now, what is the future for the family. Issues like that are very sensitive and bring up memories, and we're moving forward. So we're going to avoid topics such as that. But one question, and I'm going to start with, is how did we get our speaker all the way from Israel to join us tonight to talk about this human story? And with that, the secret lies with my fellow board member, Leslie Chanin, who is going to come up and introduce our speaker for tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Glad you could join us today. Wow, it's a nice big crowd. In the 1960s and 70s, I met Jonathan Dekel-Chen. We were small children growing up north of Hartford, Connecticut, attending the same schools and the same synagogue, Beth Hillel. I can't tell you exactly when we met. We were just two kids growing up in the same place, shaped by the same community. After graduating from high school in 1981, Jonathan moved to Israel and made Aliyah, becoming a dual American Israeli citizen. He served in the Israeli military and went on to live, work, and raise his family in southern Israel on Kibbutz Nir Oz, less than a mile from the Gaza border. In 1983, while I was studying at Tel Aviv University, I reconnected briefly with Jonathan. It was a short visit, and as these things often go, we lost touch. On October 7th, 2023, I awoke to the news of the atrocities unfolding in Israel and the fact that Israeli hostages had been taken. I thought of those I knew there, and I thought of Jonathan. In the months that followed, as families of hostages spoke out, advocating for the release of their loved ones, I learned that Jonathan's son, Sagi, was among those being held by Hamas. I reached out and reconnected under the most unimaginable circumstances for Jonathan and his wife, Gillian. Presently, Jonathan is a professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem and holds a Rabbi Edward Snowden Chair in Soviet and Eastern European Jewry. However, this week, it was announced that Jonathan has taken a new position at Columbia's University School of International and Public Affairs, where he will be teaching courses in Jewish history in Eastern Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia's engagement in the Middle East, and modern Israeli history. This evening, Jonathan, along with his wife Gillian Kay, who's a psychotherapist specializing in trauma, are here to have a conversation with us about October 7th and its aftermath. Please join me in welcoming my friends, Professor Jonathan Dekel-Chen and Gillian Kay.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. And before we start, I just want to express our deepest thanks to our hosts here, Leslie, for reconnecting with me after a very long time. But we discovered that the ties that are made in Bloomfield, Connecticut in the 60s and the 70s
You have to pull your mic up a little.
are permanent.
Okay.
I'd also like to thank Michael for hosting us here and have the opportunity to speak with all of you. We will be sort of speaking together, Gillian and I, for probably the next 45 to 50 minutes in conversation. And then we'll answer some questions if you have them from the audience.
Okay, and hi everyone. I'm Gillian. Excuse me for having my back to you all. We found that this way of telling the story is important. We've done it now with our congregation in Sarasota, Florida, which is where I live. And John lives with me most of the time. It just seems like the right way to do it. It keeps the story intimate and connected, and it can be difficult. One thing I do want to share, just to put sort of things in context, which is different today than it's been when we've talked about Sagi and October 7th before. All of the hostages are home now. And it's so joyous, and it's changed so many things, and it means that we've also need to reorient our lives in a lot of significant ways. But we were talking this yesterday, and as we were coming up here or down here, about the fact that it's also created a kind of thawing for us emotionally, because we've been going and going and going and advocating and pushing and lobbying and doing all of these things to get Sagi and the other hostages home. And now we're beginning to really feel the losses of all of our friends and neighbors who were murdered on October 7th, the loss of Kibbutz Nir Oz, where John has lived for 40 years and brought up his children. So that's just present, and it's with us tonight. And I wanted to share it to bring all of you into that space with us. So we just have it as something that we're all holding as we talk tonight. So I will be kind of interviewing John tonight. And I guess we'll just get started. Okay, first question, of course, is talk about what life was like on October 6th, 2023.
Well,
Set the stage.
yeah, of course. I'm an Israeli American, as you've heard already. But I've spent my entire adult life in Israel. And I chose to live in sort of the border regions of Israel, on kibbutz Nir Oz. For those of you who don't know what a kibbutz is, and that's fine, it's a kind of cooperative communal farm. We had about 400 residents, and it's very, very rural. And we made most of our living through agriculture. Before I became a college professor, my first job or big job was running an agricultural machinery enterprise on the kibbutz. You can see the location here on the screen. As I said, abutting the Gaza Strip. Okay. And Nir Oz, like all of the other kibbutzim, these cooperative farms, was created in the mid-1950s as a ring around the Gaza Strip to create a human border between what was then Egypt-controlled Gaza, with about 500,000 Gazans, and the body of Israel. This is what it looked like at inception, a bunch of wooden shacks out in the middle of the desert, the middle of nowhere, with no water source, sort of a heroic, romantic image of pioneering. In our founding generation of members, this is what their lives look like. This 1956. This, however, is a picture of our fields, because as I said, we're an agricultural enterprise mainly, very high tech, and we get a feeling for that there. Um, Here you can see from above the residential area of the kibbutz, tree covered and beautiful. Down below, in that previous slide, it just gives you an indication of what our life was like. For those of you who don't recognize it, in the lower picture, that's a potato combine for harvesting potatoes in one of our fields, and it's right in front of the border with Gaza. Those buildings in the background are Gaza. My home, our home on the kibbutz, was just about a mile from the fence with Gaza. We were, strangely enough, sort of the spearhead of the Israeli peace camp, all of the communities along the border. And that's true for all of the borders of Israel. We are sort of the raw steel of the peace movement in Israel, or certainly were until October 7th. As I said, that's the internal area of the kibbutz. Residential, we're about, again, 400 men, women, and children, multi-generational, most of them members of the kibbutz, but also residents of one kind or another of the kibbutz. So sort of like Ocean Reef, but without the water.
And the boats, without the boats.
And the boats, yes. Up until October 6th, it was not all harmonious. As some of you probably know, in 2007, Hamas, the terrorist organization, took over the Gaza Strip throughout the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority, and essentially created a terrorist state in Gaza. And as of late 2007, early 2008, began shelling our civilian border communities, amongst them near Oz. Other things that they did were to dig terror tunnels from Gaza into Israel in hopes to use them in a coordinated attack against these civilian settlements. As you see here, this is the two general secretaries ago of the UN walking through one of those tunnels just after a major anti-terror operation called Protective Edge in 2014. He was being shown this by the IDF. Well, that was me about 10 months earlier, emerging from that same tunnel, which was roughly half a mile from my house. There were many, many others. That was the reality on the border. However, we had absolute faith that in our time of need, the Israeli army would be there to protect us if there was any major border incursion. I think this is the last slide. And as you can see, we had, on October, well before October 6th, our share of casualties. This slide is particularly pertinent to me. This was someone who was injured, young father, as you can see, who was injured from shrapnel during Protective Edge. He survived. He's fine. But of the ones who are surrounding him, if we go from left to right, Sagi is in the red. John Berman, who was on the stretcher. Shachar Vahab is the guy with the glasses in back. His father was killed on October 7th. Dolev Yehud was killed on October 7th in the kibbutz. The guy with the green t-shirt, Ohad Ya'alomi, was killed on October 7th. All of them trying to protect our homes and their families. And the guy in the flannel shirt that we can't see his face, his name was Elad Katsir. He was killed, murdered actually, in captivity by the Islamic Jihad. All of this post October 7th. So I bring that up here to, in a way, personify what Gillian was talking about before. The war is over for all intents and purposes. The hostages are home. Those who came home, thank God, including Sagi, and those that came home for burial. But these traumas are still with us, and the country as a whole is completely traumatized.
Do you want to talk a little bit more, John, 'cause it's interesting about the political orientations of a place like Nero's there on the border and maybe the other communities as well in the region? Because it's
Yeah, it is a fascinating thing. I'll be brief because I mentioned it before. It's a strange thing. Yeah, not quite. It's a strange thing to be in these sort of national service oriented communities in the line of fire, quite literally, whether you're in the southern border facing the Gaza Strip or in the northern border where I lived for a short time, facing the Syrians and the Jordanians and all of that. But it is a strange phenomena in Israel. The closer you get to border communities, by and large, the more peace oriented they have been, and the more dedicated their sons and daughters are to service to the country. So, for those of you who don't know, um, all Israeli young men and women have to go into the army, period. It's mandatory conscription for 2 to 3 years. Um, the sons and daughters of our communities are far and away the highest proportion of not pure numbers, because we're only altogether a small number of people, but proportionally are those who volunteer for combat units in the entire country. So this very odd sort of progressive peace-knit community who produces warriors and farmers, we hope, but certainly warriors. And that's how we arrived on October 7th. And I will add that I am only here today because I was with Gillian in Baltimore that morning. We'll discuss that a little bit more
that's
later.
really that's where we're going. You ready to tell that story?
Yeah.
So tell us the story of October 7th.
This photo was taken at approximately 12 o'clock. What you see from the distance from a different kibbutz, it's about 2 miles from Nir Oz, is Nir Oz going up in flames. At 6:30 in the morning on October 7th, kibbutz Nir Oz was assaulted by approximately 250, 300 heavily armed, well-trained Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists. In their wake, approximately 1,000, mostly civilian looters, came to steal, burn, kidnap, rape. In the process, kibbutz Nir Oz, as we knew it, ceased to exist. You saw the beauty, at least from afar, of the kibbutz. This is what remained after October 7th. These scenes of absolute destruction. These posters that you'll see, these are photos of those who were murdered or kidnapped from these homes on October 7th. This is from Nir Oz. Even with until October 7th, many people asked, what on earth were we doing there with, Hamas shelling, explosive balloons being cast over, incendiary kites, attack tunnels being shot at across the border with rifle fire and anti-tank fire. For us, it was paradise 95% of the time in this community, which I think you can probably understand, because in the little that we've been here, we do get that feeling of community here that you all feel, and it's your identity. Well, it's not that distant from what we felt. Of course, conditions being very different, but this was completely off the charts. As I said, our expectation, we had been trained for decades to know that once terrorists crossed the border a mile from our home, the Israeli army would arrive in force in the kibbutz. The Israeli army never arrived in kibbutz Nir Oz. By the time the army arrived, it was approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. As I said, 6:30 is the first assault on the kibbutz. The army arrived at 2:30, about an hour after all the terrorists and looters had left. They had sort of finished their business and had exited the kibbutz. Just more scenes from the kibbutz. We will speak about him shortly. My son Sagi was one of the young men and not so young men who tried to defend the kibbutz and their families.
So why don't we go into that story? Can you tell us about those first days, how we found out about Sugi's fate and about the other 76 hostages that were
Mhm.
taken
Yeah.
from Nero's, because 1 in every 4 persons on the kibbutz were either taken hostage or murdered.
There's a slide I do want to just advance to, so forgive me. I won't probably go.
Sure.
Okay. This slide, which I hope is large enough, you can refer to it, and I realize, yeah, it's visible to you. This gives the totals of the damage done to Nero's out of, again, a population of roughly 400 men, women, and children. The first, well, for us, for Gillian and I together in Baltimore, it was absolute horror. Waking up, being woken up that morning by a mutual friend, and who had seen things on CNN that she couldn't understand, and was calling us to ask what's going on. And I woke up and tried to ascertain as quickly as possible what was happening. She didn't know anything specifically about Nir Oz, but there were already reports that there was a massive assault and massacre happening inside of Israel in our region. And keep in mind, this was a regional phenomenon. There were something like 70 breaches in the border fence through which terrorists and looters came through from the Gaza Strip. We were kind of ground zero, but there were many, many other massacre sites and assaults on some army bases, but a lot of other of these civilian communities. It was almost impossible to contact anyone on the kibbutz at that time and to get a clear picture. I was able over the next few hours, very sketchily, to understand that my son was missing. His young family had survived. We didn't really understand how. My daughter, one of my 2 daughters, was living on the kibbutz at that time with her 2 young sons and husband and so on. They had survived. My ex-wife had survived as well, after having escaped Hamas captivity, believe it or not. She and one other woman were able to do that. But not much else was known other than there was massive destruction and mass casualty event. My drive at that point was to get back to Israel as quickly as I could.
And how did you begin to know about Sagi's condition and where he was and what had happened and what was the condition of the other Nero's hostages? And this is a good question that I think might be interesting for folks. How did you discern, or how did we figure out what was reliable as a source of information and what was not?
Mhm.
Because there was a lot of rampant speculation and
Sure.
misinformation.
On the one hand, there was complete lack of information, reliable information, for not just for us, but for hundreds of other families who did not know where their relatives were or their loved ones. What does that mean? It means that on October 7th, we know that certain people were in certain places. We knew that. But after the assault, we couldn't determine where certain people were. And on our kibbutz, as you saw on the slide, was 76 people initially of a community of 400. We simply didn't know where they were. They had disappeared. A handful of them, someone from the kibbutz had seen them being led into captivity. Another handful were seen on Hamas body cam videos that were being posted online from Kibbutz Nir Oz, certain people being led into captivity. So let's say that was about 20 of the 76, but there were another 50. It was as if they had evaporated. There was no trace. Their phones had been left. They couldn't be tracked. And it was a process of weeks until we knew what had happened to them, until the Israeli army could tell us that our loved ones were abducted. They had gotten some kind of forensic proof of that, but for most of us, it was not possible to say what condition they were in. So from October 7th, when my son parted company with his wife and locked them in their safe room on the kibbutz, we had safe rooms, bomb shelters in every home on the kibbutz because of what had been coming in from Gaza. He locked them in and went out to do battle again with the terrorists rampaging through the kibbutz. We had no idea of if he was alive and in what condition he was. The only thing we knew was that there was a lot of blood in and around their home. And it was clear that there had been a battle inside and around his home. We knew of that because it was very clear from what we were seeing, and also his wife and daughters had heard it going on outside of the bomb shelter room. We only found out about Sagi's condition in early December of 2023. And this was true for most of the hostage families. How did we find out? Because in late November, a negotiated agreement was achieved through American brokering to release 104 hostages, women and children. Of those 104 hostages, 40 were from our kibbutz, from Kibbutz Nir Oz, women and children. And of those 40, or from those 40, there were a handful who had encountered Sagi in the tunnels underneath Gaza a day or two before they were released, and were able to tell us that Sagi was alive. They were able to tell lots of other families as well. But in our case, that Sagi was alive and that he had been shot and wounded seriously in his shoulder and in his leg, but that he was alive and seemed to be functioning okay and in decent spirits. And that was the one and only between then, so early December 2023, and until he stepped out of the Hamas van at that horrific hostage release scene in Khan Yunis. We didn't know anything about him. We didn't receive any positive intelligence, confirmed intelligence about his physical state.
Oh,
And this is Sagi, of course. We're not quite coordinated here with the
okay.
images. This would have been taken a year or so before, October 7th. Sagi and his beautiful wife, Avital, and their two older daughters. At the time of October 7th, Avital was 7 months pregnant. So she survived 9 hours in a dark bomb shelter because the terrorists cut our electricity, no food, no water, with two little girls, 7 months pregnant, with a battle raging all around her, with smoke in the air everywhere, and the smell of death, of course, as well.
So I'm going to switch a little bit now to advocacy. So you and I moved into action quickly as voices advocating for the hostages, and you became a very visible face. Talk about how that happened and what that felt like for you, and what moved you to feel that you had to begin to do that.
All right. To fill in a little between that and the advocate, where we are in the advocacy question, their third daughter was born healthy, wonderful, without her dad, 2 months after, 2 months after October 7th, when we were all in a refugee hotel, refugees in our own land, in the southern city of Eilat, which was in Israel, in hopes that we would be safe there and far enough away to not be re-traumatized. In the end, the Houthis from Yemen were graciously provided us with air raid sirens because they were shooting ballistic missiles and drones towards Eilat at that time. But let me just complete this
Of
part.
course,
Yeah,
my questions are out.
yeah.
Sorry.
Well, we haven't been advancing fast enough. In any case, the good news is that the family was reunited. And here we see Sagi with all four of his girls in the same hospital room, on the same hospital bed where their daughter Shachar Mazal was born. Shachar Mazal in Hebrew means, Shachar means dawn, and Mazal is luck. I'll explain those names a little bit later. But the losses are still immense, and here I don't think we have time to go through it all. But these are the people that we lost that were so close to us. A magnificent young woman named Tamar Kedem Simantov, who worked with us to create a beautiful youth village, a national youth village for the arts. We'll talk about her a little bit more later. This is her family. They were 3 generations of our friends. Johnny's mom had been my friend for 45 years on the kibbutz. Tamar and Johnny were best friends of Sagi and Avital, and their 3 little children were best friends of my granddaughters, his children and my daughter's children. And one of the toughest moments of my life was being asked to eulogize all 6 of them, so 5 in that family and his mom, a few days after the massacre. And you can see here their coffins at the ceremony. Of course, another well-known picture here is Shiri Bibas, who was murdered by Islamic Jihad terrorists months after they were taken captive. They lived about 100 feet from my house. The little boy, the older redhead Ariel, used to come over my house frequently with my little grandson. They were best of friends to get popsicles. I was sort of the adopted grandfather. One of my oldest friends, and a peacenik through and through, a man who entertained the both of us a great deal, kind of a blood brother, Chaim Perry, was murdered in captivity by his captors. And I think finally one of the icons of the Negev desert, one of the first true modern farmers making the desert bloom, was this man, Aryeh. We called him Zalman Zalmanovich. You can see him very early on the left, his old crusty image on the right, really just a few days before October 7th, and his son, who like me was forced into the campaign to get the hostages back, lieutenant in the reserves already, but lieutenant colonel in the army. And this was Sagi in captivity, filmed for a Hamas terror video, psychological terror video that was never aired. It was returned to us recently by the IDF, who obtained it in the tunnels of Gaza, but never actually aired. On the right lower corner is that's my little boy Sagi, and that's me, and I believe 1990. So father becomes son. This, of course, is Sagi at that horrific release ceremony when we saw him for the first time and realized that he was alive, that he could walk on his own 2 feet. It was a moment of terror, really, but followed by, of course, joy. He was released with 2 other young men, both of them from our kibbutz, and here him being forced by his captors to give some sort of speech. It was part of those horrific ceremonies. And on the way home in the IDF helicopter, on his way to the hospital, meeting another fellow captive, Idan Alexander, in a hospital a couple of months after Sagi had been released. They were held together for a short time in captivity. And Sagi home just after being released. And now altogether, this was taken last Passover, so just a few months ago. And just so you have a frame of reference, this is my daughter, her husband, an Ethiopian Jew, for those of you who might be wondering, and their 2 sons and a little girl who was born about 7 months after October 7th. My daughter was pregnant. She didn't know it at the time of the assault, but they miraculously survived as well. Now going to the advocacy.
Now we're on ad.
Finally,
Okay.
sorry for the detour.
No, of course. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that. About how that happened, what it felt like for you, about that journey.
I was able to arrange a flight home to Israel, I believe on October 9th, arriving on October 10th. The only way I was able to get that was through the enormous generosity of Gillian's mom, who bought me a business class ticket. All flights were canceled to Israel, of course, except for El Al, the national airline of Israel, but there were no seats available, and I was desperate. And your mom, of course, fronted the money for me to get a business class seat, the one and only time in my life that I was able to fly business class. Horrible 10 or 11 hours, but I landed there, and it was clear to me, really from October 8th, so a day or so before, that the only way, knowing what I know about Israel and Israeli politics, this Israeli government, it's the same government that was in power on October 7th, and American politics as well, and international relations, the only way um, hostages were coming home alive would be through massive, unrelenting pressure from whoever inhabited the Oval Office in the White House. I knew that to be true. Um, Domestic pressure in Israel would be important for all sorts of reasons, but that would not bring the hostages home. And I think if I was right about anything in along this road, it was that. So from our point of view, whoever was the inhabitant of the Oval Office was our primary target of advocacy, and those people around him. And so it took me about a month between landing on October 10th, being involved in an initial international press conference the day I landed in Israel, and then being um, exposed to media a great deal. Um, Thankfully, the U.S. government at the time, the Biden administration, stepped in. At that point, there were, if I recall correctly, in the very first days after October 7th, there were, if I recall correctly, something like 12 U.S. citizens being held, U.S. dual citizens, U.S. Israeli citizens. I'm sorry?
Alive and dead.
Alive, yes, alive and deceased. We didn't know that some of the deceased had already been killed. And by mid-November, I was already coming back to the States. I had seen that my kids and grandkids were okay enough, stable enough for me to be able to return to the States for advocacy, 99% of which took place in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, in the executive branch, and with various organizations around D.C. And that is the time at which Gillian and I started physically combining efforts. And it must be said, Gil was my thought partner throughout all of this, and kept me on my feet through those horrific days, months, and years.
So you're a pretty private person. I know this about you. What was most difficult about having to tell your story publicly again and again and again in so many different and so many different rooms?
It, I looked upon it as a necessity. Um, from the get-go, I saw myself as the representative of not just Sagi, but of the other 74 hostages just from Nir Oz, not knowing really who was alive and who had already been murdered amongst the 74. That only with time became clear. And they kind of, because all of these people are my extended family. That's it's like Ocean Reef, but much more intimate. We raise our children together. We work together. We eat together. We celebrate together. We mourn together. And so every one of those 74 people had been tied to my life, and I was driven to get them home. And that drove me to keep telling the story. But honestly, my role, and I was not alone and we were not alone by any stretch of the imagination. There were other U.S. Israeli families who were active. My role in all of this was to be less, because it's really what I'm equipped for, to be less telling the personal story and more being the political advocate, and getting the administration and people on Capitol Hill to the place I needed them to be in order to get the hostages home. That was, and until the last hostage came home, that was my role. Certainly outside of Israel, and in Israel as well.
And maybe if you just have a reflection on this, there was so much to tell and there was so much urgency, but how did you decide when to speak and when to remain silent? And I thank Michael for this question. It's a
Yes.
fantastic question. How did you make those choices, given what was at stake?
I think, like most other things in life, choosing battles, but it's a multi-front battle, this kind of advocacy thing. For one, you're not working alone. You're working with these other families who, someone from, there's something called a fusion cell in DC, where agents from the FBI and the National Security Council, State Department, NSA, you name it, come together and work together on behalf of hostage rescue. And a very special woman from the FBI told us at the beginning, look, you guys, there's nothing else tying you guys together other than the fact that your loved ones, mostly children, are hostages. So you have to be patient with each other. So it was a product of giving other people space when I knew it was necessary. Other people had their stories to tell. I knew what my strengths and my weaknesses are and were and continue to be. Um, and I think it was also it was not easy. I grant you, it was my impulse as a human being is to bull in a china shop, go straight forward, and whatever it is, fix it and make it right. But the recognition that in this kind of advocacy work where you have the families, you have advocacy organizations working with you to try and accomplish the same things. Um, I think I learned more than all else is not always to accept advice, but to listen more intently to advice because, just as much, I think, in hindsight, me keeping the advocacy work going in the right direction by implanting, forcing my opinion on others, there were moments when absolutely it was the right thing to do to shut up and let other people do the talking.
Right.
It's a hard thing.
Absolutely. So you touched on this, and so much of the advocacy that you did was focused in America,
Mhm.
Specifically in Washington.
Yeah.
And
Part of which we'll see now.
Right.
They're self-explanatory.
I
So
want you
keep
to talk about why that was and what you were doing.
Well, as you can see from these photos, we all understood the families, and it began as about 12 or 14, but of course, it unfortunately, brutally, it became fewer and fewer as hostages and in many cases, corpses were returned to Israel. But we knew absolutely, and there was a consensus around this, that our job in the States was not just to campaign here, well, we were after another meeting in the White House, not just campaign, but also to do everything in our power with help from others, of course, to keep the hostage issue alive. Public opinion is a big word in this case, but to keep the hostage issue alive as much as we possibly could in the American consciousness, because this is a democracy. This is a place where electoral politics are important, where constituents do call their local and national representatives, and that people feel that civic responsibility. And so all of us, again, in different ways, with different voices, with different approaches, were also kind of assaulted the media to the degree that we could. We made a wise decision. The U.S. families at the very beginning, we took a PR firm, a really a deeply rooted PR firm in D.C. to help us with that, because none of us were PR people by any stretch of the imagination. So we let professionals guide us as well, as part of the listening that I was mentioning before. But it's to be in as many spaces as often as possible. And in my case and Gillian's case, it was there were all sorts of reasons for not sleeping at night. Among them, just making a point of um, mobilizing every resource that we could think of to be in the public eye as often and as powerfully as possible, and brought me to spaces that I never would have imagined.
With
So
some surprising moments along the way.
no doubt, with some incredibly surprising moments along the way. So, it was very humbling, honestly, to speak at the Lincoln Memorial. And at the same time, actually, one of the few times that Gillian and I were separated, because she needed to be on that same day at a demonstration in Dag Hammarskjöld Square, which is just opposite the UN. The UN headquarters in New York. So same day, different location. Um, But that also included, of course, in my case, and this wasn't true of everyone, campaigning through the written word. And to the degree that it's possible to bring that to bear in places that we thought, depending on which administration and we were dealing with, would pressurize as much as we possibly could. Not everyone thought this was a great idea. Not everyone appreciated everyone else's voice. As of November 6th, I believe, 2024, Donald Trump had been elected, and we understood that we now had a dual task of campaigning with the Biden administration people and the incoming Trump administration. Of course, it would be months until he was inaugurated for the second time around, but that it was an absolute necessity to get to know his people as quickly as possible, the relevant people, of course, in his incoming administration, and to the degree that we could get them on board in terms of prioritizing release of the hostages in the same way that we had done with the Biden administration people. And that involved a lot of phone calling from November. Once the names, we started getting names of his potential nominees. And if we had that presentation here, you would see that it was interesting. It was sort of, we were breaking into open doors. I don't know if that's it's from the Hebrew, but I guess it works here as well. We were dead set on getting into those doors and speaking with the incoming Trump officials, and they were more than welcoming to us. People like, of course, Steve Witkoff, who eventually was appointed as the special envoy to the Middle East and to other places, of course. Adam Bowler, who really plays has a very important role in an agency that none of you probably have heard of before, and it's called he is the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. It was created, I believe, under the Reagan administration, and it's a special office in the administration that has all kinds of flexibility to do all sorts of things that no one else in government can do in order to rescue U.S. hostages from all sorts of places. And so we began speaking with them. We networked Trump supporters from all over the world, really. And President Trump was also very welcoming to us. And as we know, there were three stages of hostage release, or three agreements. The first one I've already mentioned, late November, early December of 2023, where 104 women and children came out. Then there was the tranche in which Sigi came out, and that was just after the second inauguration of President Trump. That, of course, is the time in which Sagi came out, and almost all of the remaining hostages, both living and dead, came out. And then of course this last one, which was September, October of this year, and just this last hostage, Ron Gvili, came home just a few days ago. One of the things that we set out to do during that transition period between the end of the Biden administration and the Trump administration, we all knew, or I certainly understood, that there wasn't a lot of love between the outgoing Biden people and the incoming Trump people, and we all know that and understand that. Our request to both sides, was whatever you guys do in all other phases of this transition, we implored them to work together around the hostages. It would be a win-win for all. Of course, for us as families, but also for the country, for both administrations, and I don't know if it was surprising, but to our great relief and appreciation, they did exactly that. The two administrations cooperated very little during that transition period, and you could say that's good, it's bad, everyone will judge for themselves. But around the hostage issue, they were in lockstep from day one of the transition. And the proof of that is that the actual agreement that was signed by Israel and by Hamas was 95% written by the Biden administration negotiators, was implemented, touched up a little bit, but implemented, of course, by the Trump administration. And so that was a clear sign to us that they had, I guess, it didn't take a lot of convincing, quite honestly. Both administrations understood that this was a priority. Um,
So can we take you now into the present and the future a little bit? So Sagi was released last February. What can you share with us about his life since his return, our life since his return? And I'm going to consolidate that with what's going to become of the Nero's community now.
So yeah, Sagi came back to Israel on October 15th and began almost immediately devouring life. He was always like that, full bore, drinking in life as much as possible. Um, for all of us, it's been absolutely joyous. We were holding our breath when he came home because we just didn't know what son, what Sagi was coming back after nearly 500 days in a living hell. And, we could only imagine it was much worse than we imagined in terms of his experience and the experience of other hostages, particularly those that were held in the tunnels of Gaza. We didn't know how his girls would react to him because they hadn't seen him in a year and a half. He had a young daughter who had never met him. And we've been blessed. We have absolutely been blessed. Um, his daughters, just as I had hoped, leaped into his arms when they first met him a couple of days after he came back. He was hospitalized for a couple of weeks because there were just some urgent medical things that had to get taken care of. He will continue to need medical guidance, supervision, and treatment well into the future. Those of you who may be medical professionals can probably imagine what it means to be malnourished, tormented, no sun, underfed, in horrific sanitary conditions for almost 500 days, what that does to the human body. And well, it did that to the human bodies of the young men who were held underground, not so young men. Um, but he completely committed himself to return of all the other hostages. And it's a common thread with all of the returned hostages to a man or to a woman. They immediately, as soon as they were strong enough, committed themselves to return of hostages, those that they knew before October 7th and those that they had never met. And it was truly inspiring for the rest of the country. Um, the Near Oz community, Near Oz was demolished um, essentially on October 7th. We made it official over the last couple of months. Near Oz needs to be rebuilt. 80% of the structures on Near Oz were rendered uninhabitable on October 7th. In addition to the human costs, 80% of the buildings were rendered uninhabitable. They've been systematically demolished. It's a work in progress. It's not complete yet. They will be demolished, and we will be rebuilding the kibbutz. It'll look a little different of the surviving community of Nir Oz. Um, a handful, mostly the older members of the kibbutz, so median age 75, will return to the kibbutz when it's rebuilt 4 or 5 years from now. Um, Almost all of the young families and their parents, so old fogies like myself, are going to be moving to a different kibbutz. And we have an aerial shot of it here. It's called Kibbutz Beit Nir, and you can see it on the map. It's more centrally located.
So here we go toward the end now. Now that the war with Hamas seems to have ended, all the hostages have returned home. What's next for Israel?
Well, this is this is a $60,000 question in Israel, and the short answer is neither I or anyone else knows the answer to that question. Um, Israeli society is in shatters right now. The attack on October 7th was by far the largest catastrophe um, perpetrated against Jews since the Holocaust. Um, if that wasn't bad enough, I mean, something that never should have happened by any means, never should have happened, not just because there shouldn't be people that evil in the world, the Hamas terrorists, but also because our army, the IDF, should have prevented it. It was a colossal failure of military intelligence and political vision to allow it to happen. If that wasn't bad enough, our government, the current government, Israeli government, to be clear, has absolutely refused to take accountability for what happened. And that has caused a national crisis that will be ongoing, and because they continue to refuse to take any accountability. Beyond that, we have the war losses. There are 1,000 Israeli soldiers dead as a result of this conflict, with all of their families. We have a social conflict because of the war and its aftermath. Those soldiers who serve in reserve duty are now being required to spend months in reserve duty, and it's creating all sorts of social problems in the country. So we have a political crisis, a social crisis, an economic crisis, um, and I'm hopeful, but don't know that there is still a thread of solidarity within Israel, amongst the Jews of Israel, and yes, amongst many of the Arabs of Israel, enough solidarity to see us through. But that can only happen with substantial political change in the country that we won't go into here, but it is an absolute necessity because you cannot repair um, we cannot repair what has been broken with those who have been identified by the country as sort of, if not guilty, then certainly responsible in great part for the catastrophe of October 7th. I don't equate it, to be clear, I don't equate it with the evil of Hamas. Um, I have been a soldier most of my life. Um, I would have died on Nir Oz because I would have been part of the security team that tried to defend the kibbutz, and only one person survived. I would not have survived in my reconstruction of that. I know, and I've trained and fought terrorists my entire adult life. I have no illusions. It should never have happened to Israel. What happened on October 7th, and one does not understand is Israel as a whole until one understands that dynamic. The whole country is saying that, and so there's a long road ahead for sure.
These are such good questions. It's hard to go through them. One last question here.
Yeah.
So yes, you are the father of Hostage. You are a kibbutz member of a border kibbutz that was destroyed by Hamas on October 7th, but you're also a scholar and a historian. So can you talk a little bit about how October 7th fits into the trajectory of Jewish history and the state of the Jewish people today?
Yeah, it's an important question. I think both for time's sake, because we do have a lot of questions that
Yeah.
I'd like to answer. I think the jury is still out. I think what's going to determine its place in history, October 7th and its aftermath, is really going to be determined what happens next. What happens next in Israel and among the Jewish people overall. Those of you who are Jewish in the audience today are probably aware that the war itself, not the hostage taking, but the war itself, has created an enormous schism within the Jewish community. Perhaps not in this room, but Jewish diaspora communities all over the world. And that also needs to be repaired. If it doesn't get repaired, if Israeli society can't repair itself, if diaspora Jewry can't come back to some consensus about Israel's place and its priorities and their own identity as Jews, then we're in huge trouble as as the Jewish people. If both of those things can happen, then I think there will never be a happy ending to any of this. There never will be. This never should have happened, and you cannot bring back what has been lost. But there will be a pathway forward. To not end on a bummer note, I wanted to just, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, just a very sweet way, at least to end this part.
And then we'll
Sagi, 2 weeks after he was released, decided to, his way of coping has been through the creative arts. He explains himself in this short video clip. He's performing here with a group of young musicians who are some of the alumni of that National Youth Village I told you about, that his older brother, Sagi, myself, and Tamar, who I showed you earlier, created and opened in 2014. After October 7th, amid their grieving for Tamar and all that had been lost, the alumni came together and have created something that's called the Tamari Project. That's her nickname, and the rest is self-explanatory.
אני לא זמר, אני אבא ששר. המוזיקה ליוותה אותי לאורך כל החיים, ובמיוחד בשנה וחצי בהם הייתי בשבי. הייתי שר לעצמי בראש כל היום. בכל לילה הייתי שר לבנות שלי ומדבר איתן על המשמעויות מאחורי מילים של שירים מיוחדים. בבוקר הייתי קם, הולך לפינה של החדר, מנגן לעצמי בראש שירי אהבה ורוקד עם מילי, שירים שקטים ואהובים, אפילו מוסיף קצת תנועות. לאחר שהחלטתי שכתיבת שירים זה לא מכתבי פרידה, יצרתי לעצמי שירים שרק לפני שבועיים בפעם הראשונה יכולתי לכתוב על נייר ולשיר אותם בקול. השיר קרן שמש הוא שיר שהבנות שלי ברי וגלי תמיד אהבו. היו שרות את זה באוטו, היו שרות את זה בסלון בימי שישי, גם כאן. ועכשיו סוף סוף, אחרי 71 ימי שישי של בדידות, אני כאן איתם בסלון, שר איתם כאן. אל תלכי קרן שמש, לא נגמר לנו היום. למה את מסתתרת עננים בכל מקום? אל תבכי כמו הגשם, לא חבל על הדמעות. יד חמה מבקשת לחבק אותך שעות. שים שירים שאת אוהבת, אתן לך יום להירגע. אני נגנב שאת צוחקת ככה אליי. תגידי מה את מבקשת, שלא יהיה לי שום תירוץ. כשאין מילים את מתרגשת ככה אליי.
תחייכי, זה יפה לך, זה עושה לי את היום. אם פתאום את נרדמת, תחייכי גם בחלום. מטוסים בשמיים, אנשים על רכבות. אל תבכי קרן שמש, זה הזמן שלך לחיות.
אשים שירים שאת אוהבת, אתן לך יום להירגע. אני נגנב שאת צוחקת ככה אליי. תגידי מה את מבקשת, שלא יהיה לי שום תירוץ. שאין מילים את מתרגשת ככה אליי. אל תבכי קרן שמש, קחי לך בית אחרון. איך תמיד את אומרת, ניפגש עם אור ראשון. השיר הוא קודם כל הכל שיר אהבה. עבורי, מילי היא קרן השמש כבר כמעט 21 שנה. מאז ברי, גלי, שחר המזל הצטרפו והפכו את השמש לגדולה עוד יותר. הן מקור האור, החום והחיים עבורי. אל תלכי קרן שמש, אעשה הכל כדי שתישארי. עשיתי הכל כדי שתישארו. וגם למרות כל המרחק והבדידות והנתק, כל יום הרגשתי איך אני אוהב אתכם יותר ויותר ויותר ויותר. השיר הוא גם שיר תקווה. קרן השמש מגרשת את החושך, השמש מראה לנו את האופק, השמש מראה לנו את האור, את החיים, התקווה. לי לקחו את השמש למשך 498 ימים, אבל בחרתי שלא לשחרר. שרתי ודיברתי עם השמש כל יום. כשחזרתי גיליתי כמה השמש, התקווה, הייתה גדולה. בזכות מילי, המשפחה, החברים וכל עם ישראל, אני פה היום. מבקש מכל מי ששומע אותי, אל תאבדו תקווה. שלחו כל יום חום ואהבה, תאמינו לי שזה חודר עד בטן האדמה. ולחברים שלי שלא רואים את אור השמש שם בשבי, תהיו חזקים. הנפש שלכם צריכה גוף חזק. הגוף שלכם צריך נפש חזקה. תנגבו את הדמעות, לכו לפינה של החדר ותשירו איתי. אל תלכי קרן שמש, לא נגמר לנו היום. למה מסתתרת עננים בכל מקום?
אל תלכי קרן שמש,
אל תלכי.
Again, that was recorded 2 weeks after he was released, after about 10 minutes of rehearsal in his living room. But it was a powerful moment.
It sure was. Okay, quickly, some of the wonderful questions. I wish we could get to them all. This is a very short one. Can you share what Nir Oz and Beit Nir mean in English?
Yeah, absolutely. Nir in Hebrew is fields, like farming fields. So Nir and Oz means strength. So fields of strength. So that would be Nir Oz. Beit Nir, Beit is home with that same Nir. So it's fields of home, I guess, would be the best way to translate it.
Great. So this is back to your advocacy experiences, and I sort of tried to get there, but what surprised you the most in your advocacy experiences? What was the most surprising for you?
What was most surprising, I think, probably for both of us, but me certainly, was in our interactions with elected officials, mostly, those that were really deep down empathetic with our situation. And surprisingly, the most surprising, I think, for me certainly, was going into the offices, because we talked with everyone. Going into the offices of Rashida Tlaib and Ilan Omar, who of course is in the news a lot lately, and Ayanna Pressley and others, who we went there because we were fighting for our kid and for our community. They immediately embraced us and remained that way until Sagi came home. On the other side of the coin, some of those who you would assume, given their public personas, again, elected officials on Capitol Hill, who we assumed would embrace us, did not. That's not what they were about. And they saw the world in different ways. So you just have to be ready. Find your friends and accept the fact that not everyone who seems like a friend necessarily will be.
And be ready to be surprised and
Yes.
accept that.
Embrace the surprise.
Embrace the support.
Yes.
These are sort of connected, so you can. I'm trying to get 3 in 1 here.
Yeah.
Why do you think the border was not secure on October 7th? Why weren't the tunnels destroyed? years earlier. And why was the IDF not aware of the situation? What happened on October 7th? I'm going to put all those together.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those questions. I know everybody's, dinner is calling, so I'll try to be brief and concise. Okay. As I said, a colossal failure of military intelligence. The information was out there. There was meaning that the border observers, almost all of them women, who electronically, that was their job in the army, to look at the border and try and understand what was going on beyond the border for years before October 7th, were telling their superior officers that they couldn't say exactly what it was, but they knew something bad was on the way. And their superior officers, again, almost all of them male, blew them off. It's unfortunate. It's a sign of sort of multi-generational arrogance and a lack of imagination. From the and Hamas prepared. They knew exactly what to attack and when, up to and including maps of my kibbutz, internal maps, showing what they needed to destroy quickly and individual people, who they needed to capture or kill most quickly in order to subdue our self-defense tactical team. One of the reasons that I can tell you that I would not have survived had I been on Nir Oz that morning. All of that was, and so their attacks were immediate. They again, there's just not enough time to explain this in full, but command and control. Any of you who are in the military know that it's not just about the bravery of soldiers in the field. It's about command and control. They identified and destroyed within minutes of 6:30 in the morning, breaching the border, almost the entire command and control system in the south of the country. They worked hard at this. Politically, there was something that in Israel we call the conception. It was the conception of a political leadership. And I'll just say that our political leadership believing that Hamas had been deterred, that Hamas essentially could be bought off, that they were just a bunch of corrupt punks who could be bought off with money from Qatar. And that was good enough, and not believing the news that was right in front of their face and the evidence that was right in front of their face. Hamas armed itself and dug the tunnels with money that went through Israel and materials that went through Israel, have no doubt, for the most part. It's incredibly painful, but that is the truth. And one of the reasons why evidently this government does not want a real investigation of what happened before, on, and after October 7th to occur.
And I think we'll have to leave it there.
First, I want to thank our speakers tonight. Your advocacy, your bravery to face no other word, evil, which you did, is a testament to the human spirit. We can't thank you enough for what you did. We are so happy that the hostages have been returned. When I looked at that video of your son and grandchildren dancing and singing, that could be any of our families in any place. And we, as a responsible people, need to understand that hate and evil is real in this world. And we have to stand together in unity. No matter our faith, traditions, and beliefs, we need to stand together in unity as democracies and as the Western world to assure this will not happen again. Gil and Jonathan, again, thank you so much for coming to Ocean Reef. We wish you the best. May you find peace and happiness in the remainder of your life for all of Israel. May God bless Israel. May God bless the United States. And thank you so much tonight for coming out. Thank you, Ocean Reef.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here.